Sunday, June 12. Joseph's rise to power. For Joseph, Pharaoh's dreams revealed what God was about to do in the land of Egypt. Joseph, however, does not call on Pharaoh to believe in his God. Instead, Joseph's immediate response is action. Joseph proposes an economic program. Interestingly, only the economic part of Joseph's discourse is retained by Pharaoh, who seems more interested in the economic lesson than in the spiritual meaning of the dream and God's role in producing it. Genesis 41:37-57 says, "This proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and all his servants. So Pharaoh said to his servants, 'Can another man be found like this one in whom there is the Spirit of God?' Pharaoh then said to Joseph, 'Since God has caused you to know all this, there is no one as discreet and wise as you. You will personally be over my house, and all my people will obey you implicitly. Only in my role as king will I be greater than you.' And Pharaoh added to Joseph, 'See, I am putting you over all the land of Egypt.' Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his own hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him with garments in a fine linen, and placed a necklace of gold around his neck. Moreover, he had him ride in the second chariot of honor that he had, and they would call out ahead of him. Thus he put him over all the land of Egypt." Pharaoh further said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your authorization no man may do a single thing in all the land of Egypt." After that, Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah, and gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On, as a wife. And Joseph began to oversee the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Then Joseph went out from before Pharaoh and traveled throughout all the land of Egypt. And during the 7 years of abundance, the land went on producing plentifully. And he kept collecting all the food of the 7 years from the land of Egypt, and he would stockpile the food in the cities. In each city he would store the food from fields around it. And Joseph continued stockpiling again in very great quantity, like the sand of the sea, until finally they gave up measuring it because it could not be measured. Before the year of the famine arrived, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, "God has made me forget all my trouble and all the house of my father." And he named the second one Ephraim, for he said, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." Then the 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt ended, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. The famine developed in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. Eventually, all the land of Egypt suffered from the famine, and the people began to cry to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you." The famine continued over all the surface of the earth. Then Joseph began to open up all the granaries that were among them, and to sell to the Egyptians, as the famine had a strong grip on the land of Egypt. Moreover, people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy from Joseph, because the famine had a strong grip on all of the then known earth. What is God's place in the success of Joseph? Pharaoh selects Joseph to take charge, not so much because he has interpreted his dreams correctly and revealed the forthcoming problem of the land, but because he has a solution to that problem, because his advice was good, an opinion also shared by Pharaoh's servants. Pharaoh's choice seems to have been more pragmatic than religious, and yet Pharaoh recognizes that the presence of the Spirit of God is in Joseph, who is qualified as discerning and wise, an expression that characterizes the wisdom that God gives. All the details reported in the biblical text fit the historical situation of Egypt at that time. Politically, the fact that Pharaoh appoints Joseph as vizier is not unusual in ancient Egypt, where cases of foreign viziers have been attested. The next 7 years are years of abundance, in such a marked way that the grain production becomes immeasurable, a sign of supernatural providence. The comparison as the sand of the sea reveals that it is God's blessing. Joseph personally reflects that blessing in his own faithfulness, a coincidence that evidences the presence of the same God behind the two phenomena. Joseph has 2 sons, whose names show Joseph's experience of God's providence, which has transformed the memory of pain into joy, Manasseh, and the former affliction into fruitfulness, Ephraim. What a powerful example of how God turned something bad into something very good. What are the ways that others should be able to see, from the kind of lives that we live, the reality of our God? From the book Patriarchs and Prophets, page 332 and 368 to 369, it says, Joseph was faithful to God, and his fidelity was a constant testimony to the true faith. It was to quench this light that Satan worked through the envy of Joseph's brothers to cause him to be sold as a slave in a heathen land. But God overruled events, however, so that the knowledge of himself should be given to the people of Egypt. Both in the house of Potiphar and in the prison, Joseph received an education and training that, with the fear of God, prepared him for his high position as a prime minister of the nation. From the palace of the pharaohs, his influence was felt throughout the land, and the knowledge of God spread far and wide. The Israelites in Egypt also became prosperous and wealthy, and such as were true to God exerted a widespread influence. To the people of Egypt and of all the nations connected with that powerful kingdom, God manifested himself through Joseph. Why did the Lord choose to exalt Joseph so highly among the Egyptians? He might have provided some other way for the accomplishment of his purposes toward the children of Jacob, but he desired to make Joseph a light, and he placed him in the palace of the king, that the heavenly illumination might extend far and near. By his wisdom and justice, by the purity and benevolence of his daily life, by his devotion to the interests of the people, and that people a nation of idolaters, Joseph was a representative of Christ. In their benefactor, to whom all Egypt turned with gratitude and praise, that heathen people were to behold the love of their Creator and Redeemer. So in Moses, also God placed a light beside the throne of the earth's greatest kingdom, that all who would might learn of the true and living God. And all this light was given to the Egyptians before the hand of God was stretched out over them in judgments. God bless.